Hello, photographers. Real quick before we get started, the 2020 5-day deal photography bundle is available now, but it's only available until October 20th, 2020. You can get $3,000 worth of photography education for under $100. Check out the link, and now let's get on to the video. Today I wanted to do a photo breakdown of this photo that you see right here, which I'm calling Falling. And I'm going to show you how I shot it, how I edited this, and then I want to talk a little bit about what this photo means to me and what photography means to me in general. First, how did I shoot the photo? This is the final edit that you see here. I'm going to jump over to Lightroom so that you can see how the photo itself was shot. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the lighting and everything else. So this is the raw photo out of the camera. And as you can see, I've got these platforms here with a stool for Cecilia to pose on. And the idea was to capture this feeling of falling in the sky, right? And the hard part about this was for Cecilia to pose. If you've ever tried to pose on a stool like this and make it look natural, like you're falling, free falling, it's very difficult to do. So Cecilia did an amazing job here. And I lit this thinking about what I wanted to do in the edit, in the composite. And where I started and where I ended were actually two very different places. Because when we started with this idea, the idea that I kind of had was that in the sky, where the moon is, where you see here where the moon is, in the sky, instead, I would have a profile of her face. So you can see here, I took a bunch of different profile shots, thinking that I would have the profile taking the role of the moon, like you see right here, and then have her falling from that. But when I tried that, when I put the profile up there, it didn't work. It just didn't work at all. So regardless, what I knew was the source up above, whatever it was, the profile of the face, in this case it ends up being the moon, would be a light source. So I lit Cecilia from above using a 32-inch gridded softbox on a Godox AD200. And the power, if I remember correctly, was set to either 1/4 or 1/2 power. I don't remember exactly which. Somewhere in that neighborhood. And that worked out really well from above, but there was another problem. If you look at some of the early shots as I'm tweaking the lighting, and as she's sort of half posing, just as I'm trying to figure out the lights, when I don't have that light below her, we lose a lot. And I wanted to be able to see more of her shape. I wanted to see detail in her legs down here. I wanted to see detail in her arms and her face and her hair and everything else. So after trying a few different things, I ended up with this light positioned down below her. And that ended up working really, really beautifully. So this is two lights. One light from above in a gridded softbox down, and then this light from below illuminating her from below, giving us some additional detail, giving us some beautiful rim light on her shape, and just really letting her stand out. So once we had the lighting set, we took some shots and she posed and we got this, which I'm absolutely thrilled with. And the next step was the edit. So let's switch over to Affinity and I'll talk a little bit about how I edited this photo. The very first step here, let me just turn off all of the layers. Let's take it all the way back down to the original photo. The first step here was actually just to separate Cecilia from the background. And I did that very simply, just using the selection tools to create a mask and to separate her from the background. So you can see right now I have the mask turned off, but if I turn this mask on, now I've got Cecilia separated from the background. But there's an issue here, right? You can tell where the stool was. And that's a problem. I had to fix that. And I did that with a little bit of liquefying. So I'm going to turn off this background layer. And you can see here I've got two different layers, one called unmeshed and one called meshed. The unmeshed one is the original non-liquefied version. And the meshed one, which is actually down here, is the liquefied version. And you should be able to see there's a very subtle difference between the two. With this one here, her torso looks flat where it was resting on the stool. And as I move down, you can now see that there's a bit of curvature. I just very gently liquefied her torso outward because that's how your body would react in a free fall. You would have curvature in your torso rather than flatness from resting on something. So that small change made a huge, huge difference in how this looks and made it look real and natural. You'll also notice that I actually expanded the canvas a great deal here and moved her down in the photo. So I'm going to turn off the unmeshed version because this now was my base. And I knew I wanted just a very deep black background, so I created a fill layer, and I just put that fill layer as the base or background layer. And it's just a black fill layer. There's nothing fancy about this. It's just a black square. So after that, it was figuring out what to do in the sky. And I tried putting that profile in the sky, like I said, and that did not work. So then I went to Unsplash, and I found this photo of the moon from NASA. And I thought, oh, that could work out really, really well. So I dropped that in there. And I knew from the beginning that I wanted something tethering her to whatever she was falling from in the sky. I didn't just want the free fall. So I ended up with these pipes. Now, these pipes I shaped using the mesh warp tool. So if I turn this layer on right here, this straight pipe right here is the original pipe that I worked with. And this is just a stock asset that I had, a stock photo that I have in a big library of stock photos that I've accumulated over the years. And what I would do is I would duplicate the pipe so that I had my original one in case I needed to go back to it. And then I would use the mesh warp filter to move the pipe around and put it where I wanted to. So let me just give you a quick example. I went into my filters, here's my wet mesh warp, and I would just drag and use the handles to push things around until the shape looked the way that I wanted it to look. And then I'd apply the mesh warp, and that was phase one. Because the second problem with the pipes is somehow connecting them to her in a way that's realistic. And that required some manipulation of shadows, right? Because if we take a look at this pipe, and I believe this is pipe number 3, right? That is connecting into her arm. And if I take away all of the stuff that I used to blend the pipe into her, it obviously looks terrible because it just looks like something that I pasted over her arm. I needed to make it look like it goes into her arm. So first I added a mask to round off the edge of the pipe so that it looks like it goes into her arm rather than just sort of truncating over her arm. But that doesn't look quite right either because where you're going to have that connection point, you're going to have a little bit of shadow. And if you look at the pipe and you look at the light sources and you look at the way the light's falling, the pipe should be casting some shadow on her arm as well. So what I did here is I added a layer and I just used a black brush to paint a little bit of shadow on there. And then I used the opacity adjustment to lower the opacity to make it a little less intense because I didn't want it to be, like, you don't want it too see-through, but you don't want it so solid that it looks unnatural. So I had it around 89 or so. And I also used the Gaussian blur filter on this layer to just blur that shadow out a little bit and make it look more realistic. So that right there helps make a strong connection point to her skin and make it look like it's going into her body. And then I needed another shadow, which was the pipe casting the shadow along her arm. And I did the same thing on a separate layer, which you can see right here. I used the black brush tool and I painted that on there. And then I used the Gaussian blur tool, and then I adjusted the opacity down until the shadow looked the way that I wanted it to look. And that made a tremendous difference. It makes the pipe look much, much more natural and makes it look like it connects to her in the way I wanted it to. There was another one that was pretty difficult, which was right here, where I had to do the same kind of thing. I had to add some shadow and make the shadow look realistic, and I had to round off the pipe edge to make it look like it connected more realistically as well. This one here was fairly easy because the way the foot was positioned, all I had to do was sort of level off the pipe on the end of the foot. I don't need shadows here because the way we're looking at the foot, we wouldn't see any shadows. And the last one over here was the easiest because this one goes behind her head to connect to the elbow that you can't see. So I just needed to blend it in with the hair so that that looked realistic there. I also had to connect them to the moon in a way that looked realistic. So I did a very tiny bit of liquefying to make the moon pucker a little bit where the pipe connects so that it looks like there's a little bit of an opening where the pipe comes out of that moon. And that's just the liquefy tool and just a little bit of nudge, a little bit of push nudge right up in that area. So with those in place, I was quite happy. But I wanted something a little bit more, and that's where I ended up adding this smoke. So you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different smoke images that I just layered around the moon to add smoke in. And each one of these I've set to the screen blending mode. It's one of the secrets to composites. Screen blending mode is amazing for adding stock assets in easily. So that's a breakdown of how I created this image. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why I created this image and how I feel. Obviously, 2020 has been a rough year for a lot of people, but 2020 isn't the only reason I wanted to talk about this, right? This photo sort of encapsulates how I feel about 2020 in general. But more importantly, it's being able to express ourselves through photography, through creative endeavors. This image means a lot to me because of that. Another image that means a lot to me is this one right down here, which is another one of Cecilia. And this is a photo that she wanted to create after she attempted suicide. She wanted to express what she felt in the aftermath of that. And expressing this was an important therapeutic thing for her to do, and I was honored to be able to help bring that to life for her. Creative expression is something that is important to us as human beings, that it can help us cope with difficult and stressful situations. Now, one of the things I wanted to share in talking about this is that it doesn't mean you have to do something like this, where it's this elaborate composite or it's this portrait that expresses something specific. It can just be you taking photos to pursue that and create something that is meaningful to you. And I wanted to read something from a friend of mine, Sean, that illustrates this. I asked him to share this with me because this is something that we've talked about a little bit. And he shared with me how photography has helped him in his mental health in 2020. Sean says, my photography journey literally started on January 1, 2020. I went out to some local parks and began shooting. Still being new to everything, especially to my camera, I made the most of the day and felt happy with my results. Little did I know that this would be the key to surviving 2020. I continued taking photos and learning all I could about the craft at an almost obsessive level. At this point, I knew it was more than just a hobby. Only a few months into 2020, COVID really took hold of the US, and I found myself holding photography even closer. My mental health took a huge hit at the beginning, but photography was now my escape from the chaos of the pandemic. I could pick up my camera, head to a park, and shoot until I was content. With every trip I made, my skills improved, and so did my mental health. I couldn't wait to pick up my camera and see what was out there for me to photograph. I kept learning, and it kept pulling me from the darkness that almost swallowed me when my quarantine started. Here it is, October, and I'm still getting out there to shoot, still learning the craft and learning even more about the wildlife I'm capturing in my shots. Bottom line, without photography, I wouldn't be in the frame of mind I am now. I owe my life and 2020 to photography. So my point here really is just that photography can mean so much more than just taking photos. I've talked a lot about the creativity of it. I talk a lot about creating meaningful work, but I wanted to touch on the fact that meaningful can just mean helping us cope and deal with whatever it is that is going on in our lives. Thank you for watching, and don't forget about the 5-day deal. In fact, my new video course, Beyond Manual Mode, is launching with this year's 5-day deal. Beyond Manual Mode is all about building on the fundamentals to help you do two things. First is to learn more about the camera and how it works so that you can use your camera to its maximum potential. Second is to embrace and extend your creativity so that you can make images instead of just taking photos. The lessons in Beyond Manual Mode weave together the technical and the creative to give you the tools to start exploring your photography more intensely and more creatively. And like all of my courses, it is packed with fun, practical, and easy to follow lessons to help you bring what's in your head to life in your photos. Specifically, Beyond Manual Mode has 17 brand new video lessons covering things like dynamic range, how to give control back to the camera, color theory, and a bunch more different stuff. And that is just my course. The 5-day deal has courses from amazing educators like Matt Granger, Jessica Whitaker, Joel Grimes, and Jerry Giannis. In fact, I am excited to go through Joel Grimes's One Light Masterclass course. And that is right. I've already purchased the 5-day deal for myself. I mean, why wouldn't I? It is an incredible value. Now, the 5-day deal doesn't last long. It's right in the name, and you only have until October 20th, 2020 to get this deal. So go check it out at this link and then take some damn photos.